It's hard to tell, Yvonne. What it does allow is aid to come from the Ashdod port, which is not far to the north of Gaza. Israel has allowed that to be used for for the landing of aid shipments, and then some of them will be able to go, presumably, through areas into the north of Gaza, which is where the risk of starvation is the highest. It's where Israel's military has destroyed much of the infrastructure, and that the people are at the greatest risk of starvation. But the problem is in the north of Gaza that the main aid distribution agency, UNRWA, the one that we've heard a lot about during this conflict, Israel has prevented UNRWA from operating in the north of Gaza, and they're the agency with the distribution hubs which has had the greatest and lengthiest involvement with distributing aid inside Gaza. So only other agencies are able to actually take the aid, and it's unclear who's actually distributing the aid to that at-risk population in the north. When they opened the crossing yesterday, about 30 trucks provided by Jordan went through, and it's also not clear whether that is full truckloads or not, because Israel just counts the number of trucks, while the aid agencies actually count whether or not the trucks carry a full load. There's a very laborious and intensive inspection process by the Israelis as part of getting aid into Gaza, and not all the aid makes it in. So it's very hard to say what difference it makes. It was no surprise and no coincidence that they opened that crossing on the same day the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was visiting, and he's made such a point about the need for more aid into Gaza.
Well, in that visit, Antony Blinken met with Benjamin Netanyahu. What was achieved in that meeting?
It's hard to say. I mean, they've had so many meetings since this conflict began. The US makes the same points about the need for protection of civilians, the need for an increase in the amount of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Secretary Blinken also reiterated the need for Hamas to accept the ceasefire deal, saying it was a very strong proposal. These are all things we've heard before. There are different considerations for the United States and Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu's government has taken an entirely different direction to that recommended at times by their closest ally, the United States. So the Secretary of State came out of that meeting saying that he emphasised aid. He made a special visit to the Ashdod port, also to the Kerem Shalom crossing, the main entry point for goods into Gaza. So it's clear that aid was the focus of that visit, and it's also clear that Israel has made a number of concessions in the past month since its military killed 7 aid workers who were working to deliver aid in Gaza. These things that have happened, this opening of new crossings, allowing the Ashdod port to be used for aid, they've all occurred since that event, and they're all the result, the US says, of its urging to do more in the space of humanitarian aid.
But meanwhile, Hamas is considering the deal. Do you think it will accept it? It's being pressured to.
Well, yeah, as I said, the US has said this before. Antony Blinken has said it before. This is probably a better deal than the last time Antony Blinken urged Hamas to accept the deal. A better deal for Hamas, I mean. Hamas has indicated in a Lebanese newspaper report, quoting one of its officials, that it doesn't like the deal. It said that doesn't mean negotiations are over, it doesn't mean it's walking away, it just says it wants Israel to come back with some points amended. Israel keeps saying it's up to Hamas, the deal's on the table, it's a good deal. Hamas, of course, for its part, wants the deal to include a more lasting end to the war. And Israel has been very clear that it doesn't want the ceasefire to mean it has to stop fighting in Gaza. So that is probably one of the key sticking points. Egypt, in the middle as a mediator, has been trying to soften that, get Hamas to agree to an initial ceasefire, and then to talk about next steps afterwards. We don't know exactly where the negotiations are at. Israeli negotiators went to Cairo yesterday for a 3-hour meeting. It's not looking clear whether we'd have, earlier this week there was talk of a ceasefire being imminent. It's not really looking like that's about to happen.
Meanwhile, Colombia has announced it will sever diplomatic relations with Israel over the crisis in Gaza following its regional neighbour, Bolivia. How has Israel reacted to this?
In the same way they've reacted to other criticism of the conduct of the war, the Foreign Minister, Israel Katz, he described the President of Colombia's comments as anti-Semitic and accused the President of siding with the vilest monsters in humanity, I think a reference to Hamas. It's part of a pattern in Latin America that we've seen from Bolivia, which also cut ties with Israel after its offensive in Gaza. Chile recalled its ambassador to Israel. So Israel, understands that it's not popular in parts of Latin America. There's been criticism from Brazil. They would view this as part of a growing problem diplomatically. There's a real sense of worry about Israel's diplomatic isolation. But we have seen this predictable pattern of response, which is to label criticism of Israel's conduct during the war as anti-Semitic.
Eric Tolchek in Jerusalem, thank you.